Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Michelle Whitty here with John Kiriakou, and as we said, we are going to talk a little bit more about this rail strike Joe Biden says he's averting.
This is bad.
We're going to talk about sports, gambling, and college campuses. We're going to talk about what the crypto crash has in common with the 2008 financial crisis. And we're going to talk a little bit about Elon Musk versus Apple and Apple's monopoly power. Although it bears saying Twitter's still in the Apple store.
Yeah.
So I don't know how much of
far,
this is
so good.
Just smoke, no fire. Joining us for all of this is Steve Grumbine. He's founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action. He hosts the podcast Macro and Cheese. He's an evangelist for modern monetary theory, and we love to talk to him. How you doing, Steve? Thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you so much. And I love talking to you guys, too.
Yay.
Same here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's talk about the most progressive president since FDR, champion of the working man, Joe Biden, calling on Congress now to force rail workers into a contract that many of them have rejected. And Joe Biden is explicitly saying to force them into this contract because Congress has the power to either do that, to force this contract on workers, or to order negotiations to continue, or to force arbitration. Joe Biden wants to push them into this deal. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, he even said in his statement, Congress might be tempted to try to muck around and change the details, but don't do that because any delay means a strike could happen. And I have to say, from what I can see, these unions, sure that a strike is on the table, but they haven't seemed to have been in a rush. They pushed the date of a strike back several times to allow for voting by different unions, to allow for negotiations. And so to me, it seems sort of disingenuous to suggest that if, Congress maybe tries to sweeten this deal a little bit more for workers, the workers will end up, biting the hand that feeds them. So I wonder, what do you make of this move by Joe Biden?
I for a minute, I was wondering where his wavy-haired bouffant was from his 1980s Reagan version.
Yeah.
Because this felt remarkably like air controllers.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, if you're a fan of labor, which obviously being a lefty, I very much am, you recognize that he's taking away the agency of unions here.
Mm-hmm.
He's literally forcing them to do something that is declared by them, who have the legal right to organize and the legal right to negotiate their own, deals.
Right.
He's literally putting them in a position, a la Reagan, to accept something that they've already deemed unacceptable. So for me, this is once again more right-wing nonsense from the most, let's be fair, FDR was no lefty. And, he may be the most, FDR-ish like president since FDR, which I think is kind of comical, but whatever.
Sure, if that's the bar, okay. Maybe we could have a better standard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this is a little bone chilling to me, because the minute labor gets a little bit of power, in comes the capital order to crack down with austerity via, threats and other things. And this is all part of, and by the way, please read Clara Mattei's book, The Capital Order. But this is all about maintaining the capital order.
Mm-hmm.
And by forcing these guys through. And I want to tell you one more thing, too, that makes this even more important. When you're looking at strikes in general,
mm-hmm.
obviously labor has been gutted for the last 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it has been a total just bloodbath on the labor side, from union bosses being too cozy with the industry, to simply legal maneuvers by our very much capital order saving government attacking the desires of labor,
mm-hmm.
and making strikes illegal and making all sorts of tactics illegal. So I have said for a long time, and this is backed up by labor leaders like Joe Burns, who's written great books such as Class Struggle Unionism. This is backed up that in the end, strikes by such things as railroad workers are vital because we don't have a union floor anymore. We don't have the water cooler like we once did. We don't have those common factory floors where unions can just crop up and walk out.
Mm-hmm.
And so the places where strikes would be most effective in terms of really bringing about systemic change, not just in their industry, but systemic change where people could actually get behind it and create the grounds for a general strike, are power places like the longshore, dock workers, and railroad mass transportation for moving goods and services across the country, especially petroleum products, et cetera. So the level of pushback that Biden's doing here is very, very strategic, though probably misunderstood by most. And it's unfortunately not strategic in labor's favor.
Yeah. Yeah, and so it raises the question of what happens politically as a result, right? Because, I think the Democrats have very clearly not been the party of labor for a long time.
Yeah.
But this does have something of a nail in the coffin feel. And so you wonder, how many people does this affect? Does this affect the Democratic Party as a whole? Where do these workers go? And on one hand, you think, okay, well, there's the potential for people to sort of shift Republican, because at least when Republicans pass tax breaks, people do get a little bit more money in their paycheck. But also union membership is so low in this country, as you've mentioned. You think, how much of an impact does this have? Do you end up with people who don't swing from one party to another, or who just end up totally disaffected? Or, do you see, this is happening at the same time as we are in a trend of union organization, right? Especially in the retail sector. And so, does this actually trigger a fight back? What do you think happens?
Well, first of all, let's be fair. This is possibly the largest, most massive elephant in the room that no one will talk about. And that is that the rank and file Democrat is just as propagandized as the rank and file Republican. And so, you see all of them proudly bearing their yellow and blue flags on their profile pictures everywhere. They eat mother's milk like it's manna from heaven. And they accept the official narratives of just about everything put in their way. And so as a result of this kind of stranglehold that propaganda and deception and the story is told by the victor, so to speak, we have a huge swath of our population that genuinely believes literally every single thing they're told from Rachel Maddow and the rest of the gang, Chris Cuomo's and all the others, okay? These guys are genuinely not thinking. So a move like this, if Biden says this is in the name of protecting our democracy, that's enough. They'll be like, oh, well, Biden's looking out for us. What do you mean? Of course, this is the right thing to do. So we aren't dealing with reality. We're dealing with this almost mindless lemming flavor that the propaganda machine of this country and the psyops that have occurred that have infiltrated our brains at every level. I mean, we're talking about down to the casual conversation at the grocery store, to the sitcoms we watch, to the cartoons we watch, to the newspapers we read, you name it. And as a result of that, it just becomes the thing. Even if you didn't have an opinion one way or the other, by osmosis, you end up picking it up. So while we're the hardy band of people that are recognizing the imbalance of labor and capital and understanding the game at play, while this fascist regime, which is the combination of corporation and state, weighs in on labor here, they don't understand that.
Yeah.
That's a bridge too far. So is it going to change anything? No, that's the problem.
Yeah.
Because we don't have a media apparatus. God love you here at Sputnik and all of us independent folks trying to make a dent. But we are up against odds that are so incredible. And it doesn't even matter what subject it is. So when you're talking about labor, people think labor is a thing of yesteryear. They don't understand that labor is even a thing. There's people in this country that have grown up in an era where there haven't been unions.
Yeah.
And they don't really understand. They don't even know what call waiting is, much less, that, hey, the show comes on at 3:00 in the afternoon. You better be sitting in front of your television set.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're getting food, this information feed at any place from anywhere at any time. And unless they're dialed in to folks like yourself or shows like this where they get to hear that meat and potatoes, it's not going to make a blip. And that is by design. That's part of how the capital order retrenches and ensures it stays large and in charge. So do I think it's going to have an impact? I wish it did. I don't think it will.
Yeah.
I don't.
I think the Democratic Party has already, reshaped itself as a party of sort of college educated whites, and also, the minority groups in this country that it hasn't totally alienated with its policies toward the working class yet. Let me ask you a sad question here about Senator Bernie Sanders. He said any legislation averting a strike has to include more sick leave than the 1 day the tentative contract allowed. And without getting totally bogged down, the bone of contention here is over sick leave. Workers do have paid leave, but the nature of sort of being on call and or not on call means that your life is sort of totally in the hands of your employer, who's, making the decisions as to when you need to be available to them and when you can be available to your family. And if you happen to be inconveniently sick or have an emergency during those times and you're on call, you are made to pay for it and you could lose your job. And so they are just sort of advocating for a level of dignity that will allow them to take a sick day when they are sick. There's a lot more detail than that, but that's basically it. Sanders has said, I'm not going to vote for anything that doesn't include what workers want. Do you think he sticks to his guns?
In the end, Joe Biden is Bernie's friend.
Yeah.
His good friend, Joe Biden. And as much as I fought for Bernie in 15 and 19, Bernie has shown that in the end, he is the ultimate pragmatist. Whether or not that means your pragmatism or someone else's, he genuinely will not shake the apple cart beyond whatever it is that he can sneak by. Mm-hmm. That's why he was called the Amendment King. He's not the big guy, he's the Amendment King. And so within that space, do I think Bernie's going to hold tight? Absolutely not. Unless, of course, he has the air cover of, enough people that can pass the bill anyway, and then he can do a moral protest vote. Yeah. This is not a slight on Sanders. He's made a political calculation. It's a calculation that doesn't work for me personally. Yeah. And it's a calculation that I think a lot of people have grown tired of. But it is a calculation. It is a strategy. It's not empty. He does know what he's trying to do. Mm-hmm. He's trying to, and I think this requires a deeper answer, but I'll just say this. In the idea of Rosa Luxemburg's reform or revolution, the material conditions are not there for a revolution. Mm-hmm. They just aren't. People are comfortable. There's enough comfortable people out there that wouldn't dare part from their 401k and their portfolio and so forth. And as a result of those very, very comfortable people, you've got to understand that if you can't revolt, you've got to legislate. If you legislate, you've got to get what you can. And this is always going to be the reform or revolution quandary, because when revolution is not possible, and by possible, even Lenin would tell you, hey, if the conditions ain't right, there ain't no revolution, period. We got to work with what we got. We got to have a vanguard party that helps set the stage. And so we know that we don't. We just don't. And even the people that are revolutionary minded are splinter cells that aren't really collaborating. Mm-hmm. You've got kind of like a trending libertarian version of the world, and then you've got a real honest to God communist socialist version of the world. And the two, while they have similar anti-establishment traits, don't share the same end goals. And as a result of that, there is no unified front And without a unified front, there's no revolution. So that leaves you with reform right now. And within reform, you have to accept the rules as they are. This is the unfortunate thing in that dichotomy. And I know that probably makes people that are revolutionaries like myself cringe, but that's a sober assessment of reality.
Yeah.
And I would love to be wrong, but I don't believe I am.
Well, I mean,
why?
No, go ahead.
I'm good. I just going to say, in the end, Bernie is always going to do the most achievable thing in the moment.
Yeah.
He's not going to push beyond what he feels he can achieve. And that's very, very hard for people like myself to accept.
Yeah. Yeah. And on the topic of, people being comfortable or uncomfortable, there's an element of the ongoing crypto crash that I feel like is not getting a ton of attention. And that is that, like the subprime mortgage crisis of 2008, it is disproportionately affecting Black and Hispanic Americans and investors. And I don't think that the reasons for this are the same, right? I think the mortgage crisis was a lot more deliberate, right? But the reality is that, for people who feel left out of or left behind traditional ways of accumulating wealth, things like crypto have shown themselves to be very compelling. And of course, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, they were very heavily marketed to us by celebrities of all industries and stripes. And, there is also the possibility of using the blockchain for things like sending remittances. And we talked on the show to people who were, a couple years ago, very enthusiastic about cryptocurrencies as an alternative in countries with unstable currencies and, another vehicle for making transfers. And so, in the context of worker power, right, I think we have seen that Black families as a cohort still have not recovered from the 2008 financial crash, and now they are more likely to have seen losses in this crypto crash. And with non-white people on their way to becoming the majority of the working class, it just feels like we are creating ever more precarious conditions for workers and a government ever more hostile to the idea of collective bargaining power. And I just wonder, the conditions are not here now, as you say, but certainly we're certainly pushing more people into misery with each of these sort of crises.
Yes. Austerity is murder, and austerity is driving the need or desire for these alternative arrangements. And, a lot of people see a get rich quick thing, and you nailed it. And let me lay this out for you so you understand how this works. People that have money never have to worry. They're already in a position where their money is going to work for them, whether they lose or win. I spoke directly with Mark Cuban at one point, and he says, I don't really care if you raise my taxes. I'll find a way to win. It's easy. I always win. JP Morgan said, hey, I know a recession is bad for most people, but here at Jamie Dimon said, it's usually good for us. Works out great for us to have a recession.
Jeez.
So in the end, you look at how this pump and dump for crypto went, and you had those celebrities going out there and selling you on the idea. And imagine there being an empty bucket, because the fair value of Bitcoin is zero, okay? The fair value of Vapor is zero. But what did they do? They created a narrative, and you invested in the narrative. And the people that were there on day one were able to capitalize on that. And as they sell off, the thing would plummet. And then the next round of people go out there, hey, hodl. And they would get you all engaged, get you riled up, get you all Dogecoined into the moon and everything else. You dump all your money in there like an idiot savant. You drop it in there. You're like, I'm going to win bigly. And then all of a sudden, the guys who were there first capitalize on it, suck the money out of it, and it collapses. Now, the problem is, and this is what's happened here recently, like FTX and others, is that they have to have a certain amount of leverage. They have to have a certain amount of U.S. dollar reserves, just like a country that doesn't trade in U.S. dollars, but has to have U.S. dollar reserves to settle balances for foreign countries and U.S. in general, and maybe for their petroleum purchases, you name it. And so what happens is that they don't hold those dollars in place when people cash out. There's a run, and that's a real problem with crypto because it ain't a real thing. It's a libertarian bullshit. Bull French, whatever you want to call it. It's something other than than good.
Yeah.
And so these guys have gone out there and poured themselves into it. Now, what do, as we say, black and brown people have disproportionately different than white people? It's generational wealth. They had their inheritance was stolen from them from chattel slavery, and they never received their 40 acres and a mule. So they've been running from behind for 200 years, 300 years, 400, whatever. I mean, this country, once the Civil War ended and slavery was ruled illegal, they found a million different ways of making slavery still legal, vagrancy laws, you name it. And so when you have no wealth to begin with, and you invest what spare change you have and you lose it, you lose everything. Whereas the people that already had something, they could take a $200 flyer. They could take a $5,000 flyer on a random thing. And if they lose, it sucks, but it's not going to hurt them. But that's not the case for people that don't have generational wealth. They have generational poverty derived from. And so they're desperate to get out of that circumstance. So they will invest more than they have to try to win, to get out of the hellscape that austerity breeds in their lives. And so that naturally is going to disproportionately affect the lowest quintile. And the lowest groups tend to be minorities in this country. I mean, there are poor white people that are in the same boat. But let's be fair. The average white person still has the advantage of being white. And in this country, whiteness is rewarded. It's been rewarded since Bacon's Rebellion. So if you think about what I'm saying, it's expensive to be poor. And when you make a mistake when you're poor, there is no fat to trim. There is no rebound. You've lost everything. So that the crypto is a pure Ponzi scheme. It always has been. And the opportunity to create a stable coin and things like that have proven to be unstable as well. So it's very important to understand that all crypto was buoyed up, backed by fiat, the very thing it complains and whines about. And these people, when they cash out their crypto, they don't cash it out in crypto. They cash it out in U.S. dollars. There's a reason for that. It's because U.S. dollar reigns supreme. So ultimately, it's very important to not pay attention to the celebrity salespeople, but to really focus on the underlying business model. And once you understand the business model is to lure people in, to fill the bucket up so you can cash out as an early adopter, that is the very definition of a Ponzi. And so these guys in that space, they're finding out firsthand what legalized Ponzi schemes feel like, and it's a shame, and it is definitely impacting poor white America for sure, but definitely in a much greater way, minorities in this country.
John, did you want to get in there?
No. I don't want to. Do we have time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, I wanted to ask, if I could, I don't want to break up the flow of the conversation, but I wanted to ask a question about politics, Steve.
Sure.
Only because something just recently came in to CNN, too, that's sort of...
Wait, are you going to jump to the Georgia race?
Yeah, do you want me to? I can do it later.
No, because I want to ask about sports gambling. We have time for the Georgia race, but I have some things I want to get to on this theme, so we don't have to hop back and forth. Because I want to talk about another, what to me seems like just pure exploitation being given its head, and that is this sudden new embrace of sports gambling, which was illegal. Very recently. And now there's constant advertisements to gamble on sports, to gamble on professional sports. And also you have college stadiums, being named after gambling platforms. You have students now being targeted not only by credit card companies, but by bookies, where they'll make a deal with a college that for every time someone on campus downloads their sports app, the college will get another $30. And again, it just seems like, boy, it's unfettered, right? It does feel like there used to be some more regulation in terms of who you were able to target and just how point blank that targeting was able to be. And so now, again, it's not just Discover Card offering you a $600 credit limit at 29% interest when you're 18 and, half stoned on NyQuil at the student union, not to get too specific. But now it's whatever, all these major sports betting. And I just wonder what happened in the last couple of years. And, what is the fallout going to be? Because I predict it's going to be a lot more people who can't afford to lose money, losing money because they're being preyed on this way.
All right. So I want you to get a model in your head, and it's going to have nothing to do with sports betting for a second. What happens is we saturate markets. Markets cease to be growth and they become farms. You go from hunting to farming.
Mm-hmm.
If you can understand that dialectic right there,
Mm-hmm.
You've got a hunter side where you're building, going for the gusto, and then you've got the maintenance mode. What happens is once you get out of the hunter and you get into maintenance mode, they got to find new markets. And this is what you see happen. This is what's taking marijuana to be legalized so long. The capital order must find a way to still be the one in charge. It can't be new people, new money, new people entering into the world. It's got to be the old money being able to make money in this new way before they'll allow it. And so what happens is little by little, something new will happen. Something new will happen, and they make sure that the capital order is large and in charge and able. When it comes to sports, once they allowed those kids to get their individual paychecks for being student athletes and things like that, and their image money and all the other things. Once they went from amateur to pro in college, basically, now all of a sudden they've got new financials, new markets, new everything. So each of these things builds on the other. To me, this is all about, once again, if to use a Star Wars analogy, if you remember those big giant walkers, you would see the leg go up, be like, and then go boom,
Mm-hmm.
boom. Each boom is the market itself shaking off the wannabes and keeping the ones that are going to last on it. And then the foot rises up after they've expanded into a new market, and it lands again, and all the poor saps that got sucked in fall off the foot of the AT-AT. And that, to me, represents kind of the nature of this beast. They've saturated markets. They went ahead and made a change. Now, student athletes, now these guys have money. Well, we've got to get that money, because in the end, it's all about, hey, we printed money during the pandemic. How do we claw it back? Hey, we've given student athletes money. How do we claw it back? Well, student athletes are certainly going to want to gamble, right? And so I think there's so much of that. And as you expand and you grow these new stadiums and build these new experiences, I think these guys in the smoky rooms with the lobbyists are saying, the NFL and others are saying, hey, in order for us to continue doing this, we need access to gambling. If we don't have gambling will give your community this amount of money. Hey, yeah, sure, we'll throw in some gambling addiction counseling or something like that to offset it. But this will allow us to fund all these things you want in your local community. Will you do it? And it's a sweetheart deal that states have to take, because states are choking right now because the federal government has cut off the spigot. So the only way they can get more money is to tax gambling bets, gambling. And so I think that this is largely a take on a more austerity-driven narrative that rewards having money and gambling versus doing something, versus building something.
Mm-hmm.
This is all about rewarding the fire sector while once again crushing labor. And the people that are going to lose the most are, in fact, those poor drunks at the local pub that went and played Keno and simultaneously went ahead and put a parlay down on who's going to get the first touchdown or something like that.
Yeah.
It really is about capital, once again, expanding markets, sucking up the loose change that everybody has waiting to be spent, and making sure that impulse buys that don't require thought, buys that don't require a planning session, that you do in the moment. You feel it, you do it, it's done.
Gamify
now
it all.
You've got that money. You got it.
Yeah.
That's it.
I think that makes so much sense. Steve, I want to ask you one more question before I let John get to his politics, if you don't mind. And I just wanted to ask about Elon Musk versus Twitter's advertisers. There's a pretty funny story in the Financial Times a couple of days ago that said, according to their sources, Elon Musk has been calling or attempting to call the CEOs of big brands that used to advertise on Twitter to yell at them.
To yell at them.
Yeah, it seems like a bad move, right? So I don't think Musk is doing himself any favors. He is now suggesting that Apple is threatening to dump Twitter from its app store, right? Which I will say has not done, right? And I had a look on the app store today. You can download Parler from the App Store, which is this sort of right-wing Facebook alternative. You can download Truth Social. So I don't know how much weight to really give this allegation by Musk. But I wonder, what you make of his antics. I mean, it is true, Twitter is still getting lots of engagement. People are signing up, even as advertisers are disappearing. But the other question that it does raise is that, should we consider that Apple has a sort of communications monopoly, considering that it does lock users into this ecosystem? And even if it is not going to drop Twitter right now, it does have a considerable amount of power when it comes to that app store.
Yeah. I watched this guy. He's got like 1.5 million YouTube subscribers, and it's called Tronic's Fix. And he basically will buy up a bunch of PS5s and fix all the motherboards and so forth. And one of the things he always talks about is how these groups are not forced to provide specs so that secondhand repair shops can fix these boards. They leave it proprietary. They're intended to be obsolete. If they break, you have to buy a new one. All these things. These are all kind of baked into their business model, right? And so when you think about Apple, Apple has always had a proprietary setup that has been very alluring to certain individuals. I, however, am the anti-Apple. But these guys have a monopoly in a sense. Just like Windows had a monopoly, Apple and their ecosystem has a monopoly. I am no supporter of Elon Musk's. I am no supporter of libertarian anything. I'm no supporter of free markets. I'm no supporter of any of that, right? But in the grand scheme of things, we have lost our anti-monopoly chops in this country. And, it begs the question, why isn't Twitter just nationalized to begin with and just end this problem once and for all? And I think we all know the answer to that question. It's thematic. It's the capital order, right? We reward the makers and we destroy the takers. Ayn Rand lives again.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, when I see Elon Musk, ranting and raving and going after these people, it's more of a living vicariously through his insanity. But I'm less concerned with that and more concerned about your premise about Apple being a monopoly ecosystem. I think that we as a nation need to fundamentally understand that we all know that monopolies are bad.
Yeah.
And I think if you polled random people, do you want to bust monopolies? They would say, absolutely, let's bust the trusts. They would be out there in droves doing that, right?
Yeah.
But obviously it's not happening. And so this should make the bells and alarm clocks go off in our head as to why in the world aren't there more Judge Green moments? Why isn't the Bell system being broken up again and again and again? And it comes down fundamentally to the absolute capture of our government by corporate interests and by the absolute dictionary definition that is fascism. And so within that space, if you understand that, you know that this question is a fifth or sixth question down the question list.
Yeah.
It's really kind of a symptom. It's a Band-Aid on a heart attack. The real story goes back 5 or 6 questions, and that is, why the heck are we allowing monopolies in this country? And the reason is because we are captured. The corporate state merger is damn near complete. Yeah. And that's what you're seeing. So I think that you have to go back 4 or 5 questions to get to root cause analysis. You solve that, you solve the rest of it. We won't solve that because everybody will get caught up in the headline that is the Band-Aid on the heart attack.
Yeah.
And that's my analogy anyway. I hope it works.
Can I ask him about
yes, go ahead.
Politics real quick, Steve? I want to ask you about the Georgia Senate runoff between Senator Raphael Warnock and Herschel Walker. The latest polls show Walker losing 51-47. And Warnock is outspending him 3-1. In a broader sense, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what this all means for the Republican Party. It seems that the fight in Georgia really is between MAGA Republicans and establishment Republicans, Trump versus Kemp. The MAGA people are happy to come out for Herschel Walker because Trump wants them to. But the Kemp people are not so keen on Walker. He's proven to be something of an embarrassment. At the same time, Georgia's a conservative state. And so it's really impossible to say who's going to win because this 51-47 is within the margin of error. That's number one. Number two, at the same time, my pillow guy, Mike Lindell, is now saying that God has told him to run for the Republican National Committee chairmanship against Ronna McDaniel, the establishment Republican sister of Mitt Romney. I want to know also what you make of that race. And I'm going to add one other thing. CNN is just now reporting that in speeches throughout the campaign, and how we didn't catch this earlier, I don't know. But in speeches throughout the campaign, Herschel Walker has been talking about my home in Texas. When I was at my home in Texas, I was thinking, what can I do to serve the country? Well, it's to run for the Senate. But he's not running for the Senate in Texas. Now he's run afoul of the Texas state version of the IRS because he's claiming Texas as his residence, but running for the U.S. Senate in Georgia. And now Democrats are complaining to the Electoral Commission there that, wait a minute, this guy's not even qualified to run for the Senate because he's not even a resident of the state of Georgia. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on all this.
Sure. So let's go to the top with Raphael Warnock and Herschel. To me personally, I believe, and I come from Republican stock, okay? And my parents, even though my mother, I guess, in her last, before dementia swept her away, went ahead and voted for Trump. And, my mom, though, is not baked into the Trump-mindedness. It's just the anti-Democrat is what she is.
Right.
Okay? So if you go back, you can think about cloth coat Republicans like Nixon and others. I mean, we are talking about a guy, yeah, he was corrupt, but now we know what corruption really looks like. He was a minor league corrupt guy compared to what we see today. But the corruption is really kind of universal, Democrat, Republican, you name it. The MAGA phenomenon was really more anti-establishment than it was anti-Democrat. And so as you're watching Trump, hand laid on them, people losing their races.
Right.
The opportunists, if you will, within the cloth coat side that said, hey, let's just go with it, man. Let's just, it's better to win with these guys than it is to lose to a Democrat.
Right.
I think that you're seeing a lot of them saying, yeah, we tried that. We weren't so happy with it. Let's go back to being cloth coat Republicans, sort of. And so I think that you're watching a little bit of the, you remember how many Republicans came over to support Biden, right? I think a lot of them are not really digging the Biden train either, even though Biden in every meaningful way sounds like Reagan. I think you're seeing a basic rejection within the Republican spaces of MAGA. That I think a lot of people just accepted MAGA because they wanted to beat Democrats.
Yeah.
And if that worked, then so be it. Now that they realize it's not working, they were never really MAGA. I know people want to make the Republican Party out to be MAGA. A lot of these people are very quiet people. They go to church. They just want things the way they were. They don't want to burn it down. They're much more normal than we give them credit for, even though we might want them to be willing to change. I mean, how many friends do you have that aren't willing to change? I mean, they're just not willing to change. That's what a lot of these people are. They just like it the way it was. They want to have their history told to them with star-spangled banners and happy songs, and that's what they want the world to be. They don't want to hear this other stuff.
Yeah.
Right? It's terrible. I mean, I'm not for it. I'm not making excuses. I'm just saying they aren't MAGA.
Right.
Right? And so as a result of that, MAGA's veneer is worn off to some extent. Sadly, it wore on to some of the fake lefties that sided with Trump. But regardless, those people are not my tribe. And so I'm looking at this and I'm saying, you're watching a Republican Party come back to being Republican.
Yeah.
And,
yes, exactly.
And that's really about all you're seeing. I think that they did a taste test. They went ahead and went for the friendly samples.
Yeah.
It didn't work out. They're coming home.
I think that is exactly correct. We're seeing that split right now, and we're seeing, well, I mean, look at the latest polls. Just in the last few months, Trump's approval rating among Republicans has gone from 92% nationally to 56% nationally. Now, that's largely because of the way the Republicans blew the midterm elections. But I think you're right. I think that we're seeing this trend in favor of going back to establishment Republicans. This MAGA thing worked for a little while. People were mad as hell and they're not going to take it anymore, right? To quote the line from Network. But I think a lot of them are coming back to the way things have always been. This just didn't work out for them.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very fair way of saying it. And I think more to the point, though, right? We fundamentally know that Democrats and Republicans are very, very similar. And when I say Democrats and Republicans, we're talking about fighting over maybe 2 degrees of separation. They have created this narrative that makes those 2 degrees seem like it's a chasm, a major chasm, but it's really a very, very narrow window of debate. And so folks like, I presume us, have a much wider view of what we think the world should look like. So it all seems kind of crazy. But within that kind of world that will fight to the death over that 2 degrees of separation, I think that they've really come to believe that, I think you're going to see the Republicans of the world go back to being Republican and the Democrats of the world go back to being Democrat. And I think the fringe, and I hate that the fringe is the fringe because I'm probably part of that, will continue to scream out into the wilderness, begging people for change.
Yeah. And
they'll keep just enough people happy to make change impossible.
Yeah.
And that's the sad truth.
That's where we're headed.
That's how I see it. Yeah.
We've stolen enough of Steve's time. We should let him go.
Sorry, Steve.
That was Steve Grumbine. Steve, tell our listeners where they can find Macro and Cheese, where they can find The Rogue Scholar, where they can find all of your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So The Rogue Scholar is now syndicated on all podcast platforms, but we do a live video format Monday, Wednesday, Friday at noon on the Real Progress in Action YouTube channel. Please check out Real Progress in Action YouTube. That's where I go from 12 noon Eastern time to 1 o'clock. And then we have Macro and Cheese, which is we just released our 200th episode. Very, very high quality stuff, folks. I mean, I kid you not. Like if I die tomorrow, this podcast to me was a great crowning achievement in my life. I feel very proud of it. Every episode is green. So you can listen to the first one to the 200th one, and you're going to learn something. It's not topical. It's not current events. It's very, very in-depth education on very heady subjects. So please check it out. Saturday mornings we release on all podcast platforms, and that's Macro, the letter N, and Cheese. And, of course, you can come to our website, realprogressives.org, go to the media drop-down, and you'll find all of my work right there as well.
Fantastic.
And one final plug, Status Quo. I do a show called Let's Get Ready to Grumble over there. And when Jordan comes back from paternity leave, he and I do a combined show Tuesday evenings.
Oh, fantastic.
And that's it.
Tons to listen to. Thanks so much, Steve. Great to talk to you.
You too. Bye-bye.